My name is Tessa Holloway, and I am a 38-year-old woman. The day my family's secret exploded started with my mother screaming inside a crowded law office. Not arguing. Not crying. Screaming. The kind of scream that makes an entire room stop moving. 1 second everyone was talking. The next, complete silence. My adopted son, Malik, stood beside me clutching an old brass key so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Across the room, my brother Brent looked like he might collapse. The family attorney kept wiping sweat from his forehead. And sitting on the conference table was a thick folder that nobody wanted opened. Especially my mother. "Don't read it," she suddenly shouted. Her voice cracked. "Please don't read it." That was the moment I knew whatever was inside that folder was bigger than money. Bigger than inheritance. Bigger than the Holloway family itself. Then the attorney looked at Malik and quietly said, "Everything your grandfather wanted the family to know begins with you." The room froze. And honestly, I think my mother was more afraid of that sentence than anything she'd ever faced in her life. Before I tell you how we got here, welcome to her revenge stories. If this story resonates with you, please do me a favor and give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Also, let me know in the comments what time it is where you're watching from. This is a true life story shared for the valuable lessons it contains. We do not promote or encourage injustice, violence, or assault. Some names and small details may be changed for confidentiality and thoughtful storytelling. Viewer discretion is advised. Now let me tell you how my adopted son became the person my family feared most. I grew up in Cedar Falls, Iowa, where the Holloway name opened doors before anyone even knew your first name. My father, Harold Holloway, owned one of the largest agricultural equipment companies in the state. Farmers knew him. Bankers respected him. Politicians attended our family events. My mother, Janice Holloway, cared deeply about reputation. Sometimes I think she cared more about what people thought of us than what we actually felt. And then there was my older brother, Brent. The future of the Holloway family. At least according to everyone around us. If Brent got a B in school, people praised his effort. If I got straight A's, people expected it. If Brent made a mistake, people laughed it off. If I made one, people remembered. I wasn't mistreated. Just overlooked. The dependable child. The easy child. The one nobody worried about because I always handled things myself. For most of my childhood, I accepted that role. Life was comfortable. Private schools. Summer vacations. Business dinners where adults talked about money while I pretended to be interested. Everything looked perfect from the outside. But life has a strange habit of changing direction when you least expect it. For me, it happened during my junior year at North Valley University. It was the middle of January. One of those brutal Iowa snowstorms where the sky turns white and the roads disappear beneath layers of ice. Classes were canceled early. Students rushed to leave campus before conditions got worse. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers hurt. Visibility was terrible. The wind kept pushing my car sideways. Then suddenly my tires lost traction. The car slid. I tried to correct it. The steering wheel jerked. And seconds later I found myself stuck in a ditch beside a rural road. My heart was pounding. Snow hammered against the windshield. I tried calling for help. 4% battery. No signal. Perfect. For nearly 40 minutes I sat there watching vehicles drive past. Some slowed down. Most didn't. Nobody stopped. The snow kept getting heavier. The temperature kept dropping. And honestly, I started getting scared. Then I saw headlights. An old pickup truck pulled over several yards ahead. A tall man climbed out. Construction jacket. Work boots. Snow covering his shoulders. He didn't waste time asking questions. Didn't make jokes. Didn't lecture me about driving carefully. He simply walked over and said, "You okay?" I nodded. "Good. Let's get you out of here." For the next 20 minutes he worked in freezing weather, hooking a tow chain between his truck and my car. His gloves were covered in snow. His face was red from the cold. Yet he never complained once. Eventually my car rolled free. I climbed out and thanked him repeatedly. He smiled. Not the kind of smile people use when they want something. A genuine one. "Glad you're safe." Then he got back into his truck and drove away. I didn't even get his last name. That should have been the end of it. 3 days later I walked into an engineering economics class and nearly dropped my notebook. The man from the snowstorm was sitting 3 rows ahead of me. For a second I thought I was imagining things. Then he looked up, recognized me, and smiled. After class I hurried over. "You left before I could properly thank you." He laughed. "You already did." That was my first real conversation with Isaiah Brooks. And somehow it became the first of hundreds. Over the next several months we kept running into each other. The library. Coffee shops. Student events. Study groups. Then eventually we stopped pretending those meetings were accidents. We started planning them. Isaiah was unlike anyone I had ever met. While most students worried about parties and weekends, he was juggling engineering classes and a small construction company. Some mornings he was at job sites before sunrise. Then attended lectures all day. Then worked on bids and proposals late into the night. I honestly don't know when he slept. What impressed me wasn't his ambition. It was the way he treated people. The cashier at the coffee shop. The janitor cleaning classrooms. The elderly professor everyone else ignored. Isaiah treated everyone with the same respect. And for the first time in my life, I met someone who wasn't impressed by my family's money. He wasn't interested in the Holloway name. He was interested in me. Looking back now, I think that's when everything truly started. Long before I fell in love with Isaiah Brooks, I learned something important. Whenever life became difficult, he was the person I looked for first. What I didn't know then was that choosing him would eventually cost me almost everything. Before giving me something even more valuable in return. For almost a year, I kept my relationship with Isaiah away from my family. Not because I was embarrassed. Not because I doubted him. The truth was much simpler. I knew my family. I knew how they judged people. I knew how quickly my mother formed opinions. And I knew exactly what would happen if they discovered I was dating a black man before they knew the kind of person he was. So I waited. I told myself I would introduce them when the time was right. When Isaiah's business was stronger. When we were more serious. When I felt ready. But life rarely waits for perfect timing. Everything exploded during my mother's annual charity fundraiser. Every spring, Janice Holloway hosted one of the largest fundraising galas in Cedar Falls. It wasn't just a fundraiser. It was a social event. The event. Business leaders attended. Politicians attended. News reporters attended. If someone was important in Cedar Falls, they were probably in that ballroom. My mother spent months preparing for it. Choosing decorations. Reviewing guest lists. Planning speeches. Obsessing over details most people would never notice. That year, I reluctantly agreed to attend. I wore a navy blue dress my mother had selected weeks earlier. By the time I arrived, the ballroom was already crowded. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. Servers moved through the crowd carrying trays of drinks. A local jazz band played softly in the corner. Everything looked exactly the way my mother wanted. Perfect. Then I saw Isaiah. At first I thought I was imagining things. But there he was. Standing near one of the presentation displays. Looking just as surprised to see me. As it turned out, Isaiah's engineering team had won a statewide innovation award. The fundraiser had invited them to showcase their project. Neither of us had known the other would be there. I couldn't stop smiling. After months of balancing two separate worlds, suddenly those worlds had collided. And honestly, I was happy. For the next hour, we talked. Laughed. Caught up. It felt normal. Comfortable. The way things always felt with him. Then everything changed. A photographer approached. "Can I get a picture?" Before either of us could answer, he snapped several photos. At that exact moment, one of the donors walked by. An older woman known for speaking whatever crossed her mind. She looked at us. Smiled. Then laughed. "So when's the wedding?" People nearby chuckled. Someone else added. "Looks like a beautiful couple to me." I laughed nervously. Isaiah smiled. But then I noticed something. The room had gone strangely quiet. Not completely silent. Just enough. Just enough for me to turn around. And see my mother. Standing 10 feet away. Watching us. Her smile was gone. Completely gone. For several long seconds, she didn't move. Didn't speak. Didn't even blink. Then she turned around and walked away. My stomach dropped. The rest of the evening felt like a countdown. Every time I looked across the room, I saw my mother whispering to my father. Then to Brent. Then back to my father again. The smiles were gone. The tension wasn't. By the time the event ended, I knew exactly what was waiting for me. The drive home felt endless. Nobody spoke at first. Just silence. Heavy silence. The kind that makes your chest hurt. Then my father finally asked. "How long?" I knew exactly what he meant. "About a year." The explosion came immediately. Questions. Accusations. Anger. My mother couldn't believe I had hidden the relationship. My father demanded answers. Brent sat in the back seat throwing in comments every chance he got. At first, they focused on practical things. His business. His finances. His future. But eventually the conversation shifted. And suddenly all the excuses disappeared. My mother looked directly at me. Her voice cold. "Of all the men in the world, why him?" I stared at her. "You know exactly what you're asking." She didn't deny it. Neither did my father. Neither did Brent. For the first time in my life, I heard my mother's prejudice without any disguise. No polite language. No hidden meaning. No pretending. She openly opposed my relationship because Isaiah was black. The words hit harder than I expected. Not because I didn't suspect it. Because hearing it out loud made it real. When we finally pulled into our driveway, nobody moved. Nobody knew what to say. But one thing was certain. The family I had always known was gone. And the battle that followed would change all of our lives forever. The months after the charity gala were some of the most exhausting of my life. Not because of school. Not because of work. Because I felt like I was living two separate lives. One life existed whenever I was with Isaiah. The other existed whenever I was with my family. And those two worlds were moving further apart every day. My parents never directly told me to stop seeing him. At least not at first. Instead, They became experts at making their opinions known. My mother constantly pointed out successful men from prominent families. My father kept arranging introductions with sons of business associates. Brent turned every family dinner into a performance. If Isaiah's name came up, he always had a joke ready. A sarcastic comment. A smug smile. Something designed to make me doubt my relationship. The problem was, it wasn't working. Because the more time I spent with Isaiah, the more certain I became. Then everything changed. Isaiah was awarded a prestigious engineering fellowship in Chicago. It was the kind of opportunity people dream about. The kind that could completely transform someone's future. I still remember the excitement on his face when he told me. The way he kept rereading the acceptance email as if he couldn't believe it was real. 2 weeks later, he proposed. It happened beside the frozen river that ran through part of Cedar Falls. Nothing extravagant. No photographers. No audience. Just us. The ring wasn't expensive. But the look in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. I said yes before he even finished asking. For a few days, I let myself believe things might improve. Maybe success would change my parents' minds. Maybe the fellowship would prove Isaiah had a bright future. Maybe time had softened them. I was wrong. 3 days after announcing our engagement, my father called. His voice was unusually calm. Too calm. "Tessa, your mother and I want to see you tonight." I immediately knew something was wrong. When Isaiah and I arrived at my parents' house, the atmosphere felt strange. The house was quiet. No music. No television. No casual conversation. Even the staff seemed uncomfortable. My father led us into the dining room. And that's when I saw the papers. Stacks of documents spread across the table. Folders. Contracts. Legal forms. The family attorney sitting quietly in the corner. My stomach immediately tightened. Something wasn't right. My mother sat perfectly still. Brent looked almost excited. As though he had been waiting for this moment. Nobody offered us a seat. Nobody asked how we were doing. My father simply stared at the documents for several seconds before speaking. "If you marry Isaiah and move to Chicago, you will no longer be part of this family." The words landed like a punch. For a moment, I honestly thought he was bluffing. Trying to scare me. Trying to force me into changing my mind. Then he picked up a pen. And signed. One document. Then another. Then another. The attorney immediately followed. Brent signed where witnesses were required. Page after page. Signature after signature. The reality slowly became impossible to ignore. This wasn't a threat. This wasn't emotional manipulation. This was legal. Official. Permanent. My father was removing me from family trusts. Inheritance agreements. Future ownership rights. Everything. Not next year. Not after the wedding. Immediately. My mother finally slid the paperwork toward me. "You still have a choice." I looked down at the papers. Then across the room. Then at Isaiah. And something happened that I'll never forget. He said nothing. No pressure. No pleading. No speeches. He never asked me to choose him. He never asked me to sacrifice anything. He simply stood beside me. Waiting. That silence somehow told me everything. Because real love doesn't demand loyalty. It inspires it. I slowly stood up. My hands were shaking. Not because I was uncertain. Because I knew this decision would change my life forever. I picked up my engagement ring box from the table. Then looked at my father. My mother. My brother. The people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. And I realized they had already made their choice. So I made mine. Without another word, I turned around and walked toward the door. Isaiah followed. Nobody stopped us. Nobody called after us. Nobody changed their mind. A month later we got married in a small chapel outside Chicago. There were fewer than 30 people there. Friends. Classmates. A few co-workers. People who genuinely cared about us. The seats reserved for my family remained empty. I kept glancing toward the entrance anyway. Part of me hoped they would show up. Even at the last minute. Even just to watch. But they never came. And as I stood beside Isaiah exchanging vows, I finally understood something. I wasn't losing my family because I loved the wrong man. I was losing them because they cared more about who he was than who he actually was. And that hurt more than I could possibly describe. The first few years of marriage were nothing like the life I grew up expecting. Not worse. Just different. Very different. Our first apartment in Chicago sat above a small laundromat on the west side of the city. The floors creaked. The heating system had a personality of its own. And if someone turned on the microwave while the television was running, half the apartment lost power. At least once a week. Looking back now, some of those memories make me laugh. At the time, they didn't. Money was tight. Really tight. Student loans followed us everywhere. Rent kept increasing. Unexpected expenses seemed to appear every month. One week it was car repairs. The next week it was medical bills. Then it was something else. There were nights when Isaiah worked so late that dinner sat untouched on the stove for hours. And there were mornings when I left for work before sunrise while he was already answering emails from potential clients. Life wasn't glamorous. But we were building something together. And somehow that made the struggle easier. Then another challenge arrived. One we never saw coming. Children. Or rather, the inability to have them. At first we weren't worried. We were young. Busy. Focused on careers. Everyone told us not to rush. Then 1 year became 2. 2 became 3. And suddenly people started asking questions. Questions I learned to hate. When are you starting a family? You two would make beautiful babies. You aren't getting any younger. The comments always came with good intentions. But they hurt anyway. Because nobody knew what was happening behind closed doors. Nobody knew about the appointments. The tests. The waiting rooms. The phone calls. The disappointments. The first pregnancy lasted only 11 weeks. The second ended before we even had time to celebrate. The third one hurt the most. Because for a while, we truly believed it would work. I still remember the tiny pair of baby shoes hidden in our closet. The nursery ideas. The names we quietly discussed late at night. Then suddenly it was gone. Just like that. Afterward, our apartment felt strangely quiet. As though something invisible had disappeared. For a long time, neither of us knew how to talk about it. Some nights we sat in complete silence. The television running in the background. Neither one of us really watching. Just trying to survive another difficult day. I remember one evening finding Isaiah sitting alone on our balcony. The city lights stretched across the skyline behind him. He looked exhausted. Not physically. Emotionally. I sat beside him. For several minutes we didn't say anything. Then he quietly asked. Do you ever wonder if we're being punished for something? The question broke my heart. Because I had been wondering the same thing. Years passed. Doctor visits continued. Treatments continued. Hope came and went in cycles. Eventually, after another failed procedure, we stopped. Not because we stopped wanting children. Because we couldn't survive another heartbreak. Accepting that reality felt like losing someone we had never met. But life has a strange way of surprising you when you've stopped expecting anything. And while one dream kept slipping away, another one was beginning to take shape. Isaiah's engineering fellowship opened doors neither of us imagined. One opportunity led to another. Then another. His construction company grew. Small projects became larger projects. Employees became teams. Teams became departments. Clients began seeking him out instead of the other way around. I watched the man everyone underestimated slowly build something extraordinary. Not overnight. Not through luck. Through years of relentless work. By our 10th wedding anniversary, life looked very different. The cramped apartment was gone. The financial stress was gone. The uncertainty was gone. We had a beautiful home. A thriving business. A respected reputation. And something else. Peace. For the first time in a long time, we weren't trying to prove anything to anyone. Especially not my family. We no longer needed their money. We no longer needed their inheritance. And somewhere along the way, we stopped needing their approval too. At least that's what I thought. I had no idea that the biggest chapter of our lives was still waiting for us. And it was about to arrive in the form of an 8-year-old boy named Malik. A year after we stopped fertility treatments, something happened that neither Isaiah nor I expected. We met Malik. It started with a volunteer program. One of Isaiah's companies sponsored a youth mentoring initiative in Chicago that worked with children in foster care. At first, we only planned to help occasionally. A few weekends here. A few community events there. Nothing permanent. Nothing life-changing. At least that's what we thought. The first time I saw Malik, he was sitting alone at the far end of a gymnasium during a youth event. Kids were running around playing basketball. Volunteers were organizing activities. Parents and foster families were talking. And Malik was sitting by himself. Drawing. His head down. Completely disconnected from everyone around him. I remember watching him for several minutes. Most children his age wanted attention. Wanted interaction. Malik seemed determined to avoid both. One of the program coordinators noticed me looking. "That's Malik," she said. "Sweet kid. Smart too. But he doesn't trust people." I nodded. "How long has he been here?" The woman sighed. "Too long." Something about the way she said it stayed with me. Later that afternoon, Isaiah walked over and introduced himself. To this day, I still don't understand what happened next. Because the boy who barely spoke to anyone suddenly started talking. Not much. Just enough. A question here. A comment there. But it was more interaction than anyone expected. The coordinator looked stunned. I looked stunned. Even Isaiah looked surprised. By the end of the afternoon, Malik was sitting beside him discussing basketball teams. When we got into the car later, I couldn't stop smiling. "I think he likes you." Isaiah laughed. "I think he's just being polite." He wasn't. Over the next several months, we kept seeing Malik. School events. Mentorship programs. Weekend activities. And every time, the bond grew stronger. Slowly. Naturally. Without anyone forcing it. Then one evening, after another community event, Malik asked a question that neither of us expected. He looked directly at Isaiah. "Are you coming back next week?" The room went quiet. Such a simple question. Yet the hope in his voice nearly broke my heart. Isaiah smiled. Absolutely. Malik nodded, as if he had just received the answer he needed. A year later, we became his foster parents. The day he moved into our home felt strangely emotional. Not dramatic. Not overwhelming. Just meaningful. I remember him standing in the doorway holding a small duffel bag. Everything he owned fit inside it. Everything. 8 years of life. One bag. That realization hit me hard. The first few months weren't easy. Malik wasn't used to stability. He expected people to leave. Expected promises to be broken. If we said we'd be somewhere at 6 o'clock, he checked the clock repeatedly. If we promised a school event, he asked about it several times. Not because he was excited. Because he was afraid we wouldn't show up. So we kept showing up. Again. And again. And again. Eventually something changed. The walls started coming down. The first time he called me Mom happened by accident. He immediately looked embarrassed afterward. I went into another room and cried. The first time he called Isaiah Dad, Isaiah nearly dropped the plate he was carrying. Those little moments meant more than any business success we'd ever had. Eventually the adoption became official. For the first time in years, our house felt complete. Like a missing piece had finally found its place. But then something strange started happening. Malik became obsessed with drawing. Not unusual for a child. Except he wasn't drawing superheroes. Or animals. Or video games. He drew the same house. Over and over. A large Victorian house. Tall windows. Wraparound porch. Distinctive roof. Sometimes he drew the front. Sometimes the backyard. Sometimes rooms inside the house. Every drawing revealed new details. A staircase. A fireplace. A hallway. It was always the same house. At first, we thought it was imagination. Then curiosity turned into concern. One evening while helping him organize his sketches, I finally asked, Malik, where is this house? He stared at the drawing for several seconds. Then quietly answered, I don't know. I frowned. Then why do you keep drawing it? He looked up at me. His expression completely serious. I see it in my dreams. And for reasons I couldn't explain, a chill ran down my spine. Because something told me those drawings were more important than any of us realized. For years, I told myself I didn't need my family anymore. And for the most part, that was true. Isaiah and I had built a good life. A peaceful life. We had a beautiful home, successful careers, and a son we loved more than words could ever describe. Still, every now and then, I'd catch myself wondering what could have been. Not for me. For Malik. Because no child should have to grow up feeling unwanted. Especially by people who were supposed to be family. The idea of reconciliation started small. A phone call here. A holiday card there. Nothing dramatic. Eventually, after nearly 12 years of silence and awkward distance, my father surprised me by answering one of my calls. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. But it happened. And somehow that tiny crack in the wall gave me hope. A few months later, I convinced myself it was time. Time for them to meet Malik properly. Time to stop carrying old battles into a new generation. Or at least that was what I told myself. The visit happened on Thanksgiving. I spent days preparing. Cooking. Cleaning. Trying to ignore the nervous feeling sitting in my stomach. Malik was 14 by then. Tall for his age. Smart. Funny when he wanted to be. The kind of kid who noticed things most people missed. As we drove to my parents' house, he kept asking questions. What's Grandpa Harold like? Does Grandma Janice like baseball? Will my cousins be there? I smiled and answered every question. But if I'm being honest, I was nervous. The moment we arrived, things felt strange. Not openly hostile. Just cold. My mother greeted us politely. My father shook Malik's hand. Brent barely looked up from his phone. His wife smiled for exactly 3 seconds before walking away. The whole thing felt forced. Like everyone was following a script they didn't actually believe in. For most of the afternoon, Malik tried. He really did. He asked questions. Tried joining conversations. Even offered to help clear dishes after dinner. But every effort seemed to disappear into empty space. His cousins ignored him completely. At one point he tried joining a board game they were playing. Nobody made room for him. Nobody even looked up. The worst part happened later that evening. I didn't hear it. But Malik did. My mother and Brent's wife were standing in the kitchen. They thought nobody else was around. Then someone asked whether Malik would be included in future family gatherings. My mother responded quietly. But not quietly enough. He's a nice boy. A pause. Then. But he isn't really family. 3 words. That's all it took. 3 words. That night, after we got home, Malik barely touched dinner. He went upstairs early. Around 10 o'clock, I knocked on his bedroom door. His desk lamp was still on. Sketchbooks covered the bed. The familiar Victorian house appeared on several pages. When I sat beside him, he stared at the floor for a long moment. Then he asked, "Mom, do you think they'll ever like me?" I wish I could describe what that question felt like. It was as if someone had reached inside my chest and squeezed. Because underneath that question was another one. The real one. Am I enough? I pulled him into a hug. The kind of hug mothers give when words aren't enough. But even as I held him, I knew some hurts don't disappear overnight. Years passed. Life moved forward. Malik grew into an exceptional young man. Honor roll. Science competitions. Baseball championships. Leadership programs. Teachers loved him. Coaches respected him. Neighbors adored him. And then something unexpected happened. My father started showing up. At first it was a science fair. Then a baseball game. Then an academic award ceremony. No announcements. No explanations. He would simply appear. Sit quietly in the crowd. Watch. Then leave. The first few times, I assumed it was coincidence. It wasn't. Soon it became a pattern. Harold Holloway was making time for Malik. Not Brent's children. Not anyone else. Malik. The strangest part was that neither of them seemed to understand why. But slowly, almost without either realizing it, a bond began forming. A quiet one. Built on conversations after games. Shared rides home from competitions. Discussions about history, architecture, and old photographs. And through it all, my father never explained what had changed. He never explained why he suddenly looked at my son differently. He never explained why every time Malik showed him another drawing of that mysterious Victorian house, he seemed to go a little pale. Looking back now, I realize something. By then, my father already knew a secret that none of us could have imagined. And that secret was quietly pulling him toward Malik long before the rest of us understood why. The phone call came just after 6 in the morning. I knew something was wrong the moment I heard my mother's voice. Not because she was crying. Because she sounded defeated. The kind of defeated that only comes when someone realizes they are running out of time. Your father is asking for Malik. I sat upright in bed. For a second, I thought I had heard her wrong. What? He wants to see Malik. Not me. Not Brent. Not even her. Malik. The request made no sense. My father had spent years slowly growing closer to Malik, but this was different. This was his final request. 3 hours later, we were at St. Matthew's Medical Center. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beeping of machines. Harold Holloway looked smaller than I had ever seen him. The man who once controlled boardrooms and million-dollar negotiations now looked fragile. Almost unrecognizable. When Malik entered the room, my father smiled. A real smile. The kind I hadn't seen in years. Then he asked everyone to leave. Even me. I remember standing outside the room staring through a small glass window in the door. Watching them talk. Watching my father point towards something in a small wooden box. Watching Malik listen carefully. The conversation lasted nearly 30 minutes. When the door finally opened, Malik looked confused. Emotional. And strangely nervous. What happened? I asked. He slowly opened his hand. Inside was a brass key. Old. Worn. Heavy. Before I could ask another question, my father called out weakly from his bed. His voice barely above a whisper. When the time comes. He paused. Then looked directly at Malik. This will explain everything. Those were some of the last words he ever spoke. 3 days later, Harold Holloway died. The funeral drew hundreds of people. Business partners. Former employees. Community leaders. Friends. People whose lives he had influenced over decades. Brent spent most of the service acting like the future owner of the Holloway legacy. Honestly, everyone expected him to inherit everything. Including Brent himself. After all, he was the son. The golden child. The obvious choice. Even my mother seemed certain. Then came the family meeting with the attorney. The same meeting from the beginning of this story. The same meeting where my mother eventually started screaming. At first everything seemed normal. The attorney reviewed financial documents. Properties. Investments. Business assets. Then he stopped. Looked toward Malik. And asked. Do you still have the key? The room immediately grew quiet. Malik nodded. The attorney slid a piece of paper across the table. An address. An abandoned storage facility on the edge of Cedar Falls. Nobody understood what was happening. Including me. A few hours later, we arrived. The facility looked forgotten. Rows of aging metal doors. Broken fencing. Weeds growing through cracked pavement. The brass key opened Unit 117. The moment the door rolled upward, silence fell over everyone. Boxes. Dozens of boxes. Carefully organized. Each labeled. Each preserved. Waiting. Inside were photographs. Letters. Newspaper clippings. Birth certificates. Adoption records. Old journals. Family correspondence. And something else. Evidence. Years and years of evidence. The deeper we looked, the stranger things became. One photograph changed everything. It showed a young woman standing beside my father. A woman I had never seen before. Yet somehow she looked familiar. Very familiar. Then came the letters. Hundreds of them. And slowly the truth emerged. 40 years earlier, a young Holloway woman had fallen in love with a black man. The relationship caused outrage within the family. The pregnancy that followed caused even more. Instead of accepting them, the family covered everything up. The young woman was sent away. The baby disappeared into the foster care system. The relationship was erased from family history. Photographs hidden. Records buried. Names never spoken again. The room felt colder with every document we opened. My mother sat motionless. Brent looked completely stunned. Then came the final step. DNA testing. My father had arranged it years earlier. The results arrived in a sealed folder. The attorney opened it. Read silently. Then looked up. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Finally he spoke. The results confirm the relationship. A pause. Then. Malik is a direct descendant of the child who disappeared. The room exploded. My mother gasped. Brent stood so quickly his chair crashed backward. Someone started crying. I couldn't move. Couldn't think. Couldn't process what I had just heard. Because suddenly everything made sense. The drawings. The house. My father's interest. The secret meetings. The strange bond between them. The child my family spent years calling an outsider. The child they insisted wasn't one of them. Had been part of the Holloway family the entire time. And somehow, my father had known long before the rest of us. The truth my family spent 40 years hiding had finally found its way home. Nobody spoke for what felt like forever. The storage unit had emptied us. Emotionally. Mentally. Physically. The truth had hit everyone at once, and nobody seemed prepared for it. Not my mother. Not Brent. Not even me. We eventually returned to the attorney's office carrying several boxes of documents. The atmosphere inside the conference room felt completely different from earlier that morning. Before, people expected an inheritance meeting. Now it felt more like a trial. A reckoning. The attorney waited until everyone sat down. Then he picked up a sealed envelope. I immediately recognized my father's handwriting. For some reason, seeing it made my chest tighten. The attorney cleared his throat. This letter was written by Harold Holloway 6 months before his death. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. Then he began reading. At first, the letter sounded like a man reflecting on his life. His business. His mistakes. His regrets. But then the tone changed. And suddenly it wasn't just a letter. It was a confession. My father admitted he had discovered the truth about Malik nearly 5 years earlier. Not by accident. By investigation. The same drawings that puzzled the rest of us had unsettled him. Especially one particular drawing. The Victorian house. The house Malik claimed appeared in his dreams. My father recognized it immediately. Because it had once belonged to the young Holloway woman whose existence had been erased from family history. The woman in the photograph. The woman everyone had been forbidden to mention. The woman whose child disappeared. My father wrote that the first time he saw Malik's sketchbook, he felt sick. Because there was no logical explanation. No way the boy could have known what that house looked like. Yet every detail was accurate. Every window. Every staircase. Every room. The letter explained how that discovery led him to investigate old records. Then adoption records. Then DNA research. Eventually uncovering the truth. The attorney continued reading. The room remained silent. Then came the hardest part. My father's confession about our family. He described decades of prejudice. Fear. Shame. Cowardice. A family so obsessed with reputation that they destroyed their own daughter to protect appearances. My mother's face slowly crumbled as every sentence landed. At first she tried holding herself together. Then tears appeared. Then more. Eventually she stopped pretending. She lowered her head and cried openly. For the first time in my life, I saw Janice Holloway completely broken. Not embarrassed. Broken. Across the room, Brent reacted differently. Anger. Pure anger. He interrupted repeatedly. Called the accusations unfair. Claimed the past should stay buried. Blamed my father. Blamed the attorney. Blamed everyone except himself. Then the attorney read another paragraph. One that seemed written directly to Brent. If you are angry while hearing this, ask yourself why the truth upsets you more than the injustice. The room froze. Brent immediately stopped talking. And for the first time all day, he had no response. Then came the final section. The part everyone thought they already understood. The inheritance. Brent sat forward. My mother looked up. Even I was curious. After all, this was still Harold Holloway. A successful businessman with a substantial estate. The attorney opened another document. Then began reading. The first few bequests were small. Personal items. Charitable donations. Memorial gifts. Then came the surprise. Actually, surprise wasn't the right word. Shock was. My father had left the overwhelming majority of his estate to foster care programs. Educational foundations. Scholarship funds. Youth housing initiatives. Organizations helping children who had experienced exactly what Malik experienced. The room went silent. Not Brent. Not me. Not Malik. Nobody. The money wasn't going to family. It wasn't going to blood relatives. It wasn't even going to the boy who had uncovered the truth. It was going to children. Thousands of them. For several seconds nobody spoke. Then the attorney read my father's final words. Words I still remember perfectly. Our family spent generations worshipping bloodlines and inheritance. A pause. Then. Look where it brought us. Silence. Complete silence. Nobody argued. Nobody objected. Nobody even moved. Because deep down, everyone in that room knew he was right. The family had spent decades deciding who belonged and who didn't. Who mattered and who didn't. Who deserved love and who didn't. And in the process, they nearly lost everything that truly mattered. Including each other. As I looked across the room, I realized something. The biggest loss that day wasn't the money. It was the realization that my father had spent his final years trying to repair damage that should never have existed in the first place. And now everyone else had to live with that truth. Life didn't magically become perfect after that day. I wish I could tell you everything healed overnight. That everyone apologized. That old wounds disappeared. That our family suddenly became whole again. But real life doesn't work that way. Some damage takes years to repair. And some damage never fully goes away. Still, things slowly began to change. Months passed. The media attention surrounding the Holloway family faded. The legal matters settled. The scholarship foundations my father created started helping students across Iowa and Illinois. Children who had never heard the Holloway name were receiving opportunities because of the choices he made at the end of his life. In a strange way, that felt right. Meanwhile, life moved forward for us. Isaiah's company continued growing. New projects. New partnerships. New opportunities. Not because of my father's money. Not because of family connections. Because Isaiah had spent years building something real. Something nobody could take away. Watching him succeed still made me proud. Not because of his achievements. Because I remembered the young man standing in a snowstorm helping a stranger without expecting anything in return. Success hadn't changed him. If anything, it had simply given more people the chance to see who he already was. Malik was thriving too. By the time graduation arrived, he had become the kind of young man every parent hopes to raise. Kind. Intelligent. Respectful. Confident. The little boy who once carried all his belongings in a single duffel bag was now standing on a stage receiving honors in front of hundreds of people. I don't think I've ever cried harder. When his name was called, the entire auditorium erupted into applause. Teachers stood. Friends cheered. Isaiah squeezed my hand. And for a moment, I couldn't see the stage clearly through my tears. Because all I could think about was how far he'd come. After the ceremony ended, families gathered outside taking photographs. Laughing. Celebrating. That was when I noticed my mother. Standing alone. Watching Malik. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Janice slowly walked toward him. I expected awkward small talk. Maybe a quick congratulations. Instead, she stopped in front of him and began to cry. Real tears. Not for attention. Not for sympathy. Just regret. I owe you an apology, she said quietly. For everything. Malik listened respectfully. The way he always did. Then he nodded. And asked a question so simple that it stopped her completely. Would you have loved me if you never found out we were related? Silence. The noise from the crowd seemed to disappear. My mother opened her mouth. Then closed it again. Because she couldn't answer. And we all knew why. The truth hurt. But it was still the truth. For years she had measured people by bloodlines. By appearance. By who belonged and who didn't. And now she was facing the consequences of that thinking. Malik eventually gave her a small smile. Not because everything was forgiven. Not because everything was fixed. But because carrying anger forever is its own kind of prison. He accepted the apology. Yet some wounds don't disappear simply because the truth finally arrives. As we drove home that evening, I watched Isaiah and Malik laughing about something in the front seat. And suddenly I realized something. The family I spent years trying to hold on to wasn't sitting back in Cedar Falls. It was sitting right in front of me. The child my family spent years calling an outsider turned out to belong to the Holloway family long before the Holloways deserved to belong to him. And maybe that's the lesson in all of this. Sometimes the people we reject become the very people who teach us what family truly means. Before you go, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think Janice truly changed, or was it simply guilt after the truth came out? And if you were Malik, would you have accepted her apology? Let me know in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs this message today. And don't forget to check out the other stories on the channel. You never know which one might stay with you long after the video ends.